Welcome. In this section, this lesson, we're going to be looking at the first section, O1 custom elements in our Visual Studio Code. So if we go in and click in here, and let's just close the README down. So custom elements. If we want to create a custom element, we use this syntax. We extend the HTML element class. We initiate our constructor with super. This is needed as part of the HTML element properties and is standard JavaScript. And we have one function called connected callback, which happens when the component is loaded onto the DOM. And you can see here we have console component now part of the DOM. We just put in some inner HTML on the element itself. And if we now open this up and have a look and see what that does, we will see there it is. This is my component and it's able to display HTML blocks and it renders this text in here. I'm using ES6 temperate literals, which is the key to just to the left of 1, which means we can have JavaScript variables or expressions in here as well as multi-line. Then finally what we need to do is define custom elements actually define and give it a name, and it must contain a dash. This means it tells the browser that it's a custom element, but it also prevents future clashes with any new HTML elements that are created that could conflict with a single word if we were using it without a dash. And basically we then reference the my component up here. So we create a class my component, we extend it. We can also do it in one line as we can up here. And then all we do is on our page, if we give it this particular name, the tag is now called my-component, and we just need the JavaScript file obviously included as well, and that is done on the page here. We'll see later on how we can actually render it out into a JavaScript file, but at the moment we're rendering this all on one page, and we've got the div element and we have our JavaScript up here. So standard ES6 classes with the connected callback API, which will load only when the component is part of the DOM. So if we go back in here and if we do F12 and we'll have a look at the console, we can see that here. If we refresh the page, component now part of DOM, everything's been created. We can see the component created in the basically in the constructor, and we can see pardon me, the console log component now part of the DOM. Now this is the very basic component, and this is just using what's called the light DOM. We will see later on in our lessons when we go to the shadow DOM that this is not self-contained. So for example, CSS would bleed out into the rest of the page, and we'll look at how we can encapsulate our components as we go through this video series. So here we are creating a custom element. If we want to put in CSS, well, what we must always remember is that a web component, custom HTML component, is still HTML. It's just an extension of the native browser components. So it works just like an HTML tag. So for example here, when we have my component and we give it some coloring, if we open up this page, we will see that it's got changed in color. Coming back here, it's green. And for future reference, anything that's inside a web component is actually called the slot. In some JavaScript frameworks it's called children, but this is actually called the slot. It has its own API called the slot API, and we'll look into how we can use that. But if you look now, we've actually styling this slot with a strong and EM tag, and so really this now works just as a plain HTML tag. So once again, if we have a look at the page, this is my web component, some slot text, and it's just taking the styling of the my component because of hierarchy. So everything in here, in the same way with a div, like we see here, everything inside this div will take the CSS of anything related to the output. Here we see our HTML tag displayed on the page in the light DOM. And to reinforce that this is actually just a regular HTML tag, what we can do is on the page add an OnClickListener in the same way we might do that with any div tag or any other tag. We can put it on here and it will work just like a regular HTML tag. So if we open up this page, click on it, there we get our event. So this is just reinforcing the idea that this is just an HTML tag. We don't call it my component, because supposing W3C decided that actually this would be the name of a new HTML tag, there would be conflict. But also it's not telling the browser that I'm a custom HTML tag, so it would throw an error. So that's why we must always have at least one hyphen, and obviously lower cases, for all our component names. Now, if you're familiar with JavaScript frameworks, you'll the idea of props. But what we can do on our components is add attributes. So if we come down here, we can see that we normally see on elements a sort of an ID tag, but we can create our own attributes, any name we want. And for example, this has system equal to JavaScript. And now if we go back into our component, we can see in the connected callback that we can actually reference the DOM, because this is when it gets attached to the DOM. If we put this element up here in the constructor, we would get an error, or it would not work, simply because it hasn't been added to the page, so it can't reference the DOM tree. So here we have, this is my web component, and if you notice here, we can actually change details here by using regular JavaScript. So if we look at this page and open it up, what we've now done is we've just changed that element there. So if we come back in here, for example, on our web component, and we change this to WordPress, WP, and save, if we come in here, we will now see that's changed. And what you can do, you can go into elements in Developer Tools. If we open it up, we can see the element here. What we can do is we could change it here, but what we'll do is if we change it here, back to JS, if you notice, it hasn't changed back. Now the reason is this, is we actually have to set up effectively listeners or attribute change to have this work, and we'll be going into that later. But basically what you can see now is you can set up, like in any JavaScript framework, you can set up any range of attributes on here so that the user of your component can literally just change values here, and then obviously the component will render differently. And that is why when we saw in the demo, for example, when we could change post by clicking a button, what was happening is the post ID was being changed on an attribute, or what some frameworks call props. So that's what attributes props are. Now you may want to create a component and allow your user to give it the name. So for example, this is the first time now we're actually putting our component into a JavaScript file. Notice it is here. Normally we would put the custom define, as we've seen before, in the bottom of this JavaScript file here. But if we wanted to allow our user to actually create their own name, we could do that here. So this is user 21, and it goes down here. If we open this up and see that it works. Now if we change it here, say to 22, we're going to get a sort of problem, because the tag name doesn't correspond with this. So if we change that back to 22 here, if we change that to 22 and open up, now it works, because the definition of the class name, of the component name, matches that of the HTML tag. Now normally, as you see, normally what we do is we'd actually see all of that in the script file where we custom define it. So you define the name, but you can allow your user to define the name if they so wish. Finally, we can actually extend existing components. For example, the HTML anchor element, the A tag. Let's create a new component called confirm link, and we're giving it the name wp-confirm-link. And if we want it to extend the A tag, we have to add this property here, so that when we come back up in here, if you notice here, when we have our A tag, to use this class, we have to say is wp-confirm-link. So what we can do is, if we wanted to, we can basically extend existing HTML tags, and by adding this is attribute that corresponds to the HTML class component that we've made, we can change its properties. in that case. And if we open this up, what this will do is when we click on this, it'll come up with a confirm cancel dialog box. And if we look at the code, that's all we're doing. Once it's connected to the DOM, remember it's not done in the constructor, we can just add this add event listener. To basically when the item is clicked, it opens up a confirm dialog box. So if you want to extend buttons or whatever other components you can, this is how you do it. So if we review custom elements, what we've done is we've seen actually how we can create our custom element, how CSS operates what we call in the light DOM, where we haven't encapsulated it in the shadow DOM, just as a regular HTML element, and we'll be getting onto that later. We've seen that HTML tags are just regular, well, custom elements are regular HTML tags that you apply CSS in exactly the same ways. You can set attributes or events on them, that you can also listen to events if that particular component is clicked. And we've also seen ways that we can define the component or allow the user to define the component's name for themselves. And we've also seen how we can extend existing HTML tags. So what we'll do in the next lesson is move on to the sort of template tag, which is a basis for further work, and we'll start that in the next video.